When she opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the sound, waves, not the distant, softened hush of water against harbor walls, not the muffled hum of rain against a window, but waves breathing in and out against sand. Slow. Rhythmic. Alive. For a moment, she did not move. The sky above her was impossibly wide, painted in pale morning gold. A seabird crossed her vision in a lazy arc. The air tasted of salt and something green and wild. She blinked. This was not her bedroom. Her name was Elara, and the last thing she remembered was the soft glow of her bedside lamp and the weight of sleep pulling her under. She had been tired in the way one becomes after too many days that look the same. Too many evenings filled with noise but not meaning. She had fallen asleep to the distant sound of traffic outside her apartment window. Now there was no traffic, only the tide. Elara slowly pushed herself upright. Sand clung to her palms. Fine, warm sand. It slipped between her fingers like powdered sunlight. Her heart began to beat faster, not from panic, but from disbelief. She was on a beach, the ocean stretched before her in endless blue folds, catching the light like silk. Behind her rose a small island, lush, green, crowned with palm trees that leaned slightly as if whispering to the wind. The air was warm but gentle, wrapping around her shoulders like a soft shawl. She stood carefully. She was barefoot. Her clothes were the same loose linen dress she had worn to bed, but now it moved lightly in the breeze. There were no footprints in the sand but her own. "Okay," she whispered to herself, her voice sounding strangely small in the vastness. Think. Had she traveled? Was this a dream? Had something happened? There was no pain in her body. No bruises. No dizziness. Just the steady, quiet rhythm of the sea. She turned slowly, scanning the shoreline. No boats. No wreckage. No smoke rising in the distance. Just a crescent of white sand curving into rocky edges where the water deepened into darker blue. The island did not feel hostile. That was the strangest part. It felt calm, as if it had been waiting. Elara took a tentative step forward. The sand was warm beneath her feet. Another step. Then another. The waves rolled in gently, reaching toward her toes before retreating, as if testing her presence. She walked along the water's edge, letting the sea brush her ankles. The sensation grounded her. The world felt real. The salt stung slightly where the water dried on her skin. "I must be dreaming," she murmured, but if it was a dream, it was the most peaceful one she had ever known. After some time, minutes or perhaps longer, she noticed something further down the beach. A small wooden structure, not large. Not imposing. Just a simple shelter built between two leaning palm trees. The wood looked aged but sturdy, sun-warmed and pale. A thatched roof rested on top, woven neatly from dried leaves. She felt a flicker of relief. Where there was shelter, there had been hands. Where there had been hands, there had been life. Elara approached cautiously. The sand near the structure was undisturbed. No recent footprints. No scattered belongings. But inside the open shelter lay a woven mat, a clay bowl, and a small stack of smooth stones arranged carefully in a circle, not abandoned, prepared. For her, the thought was absurd, and yet it settled in her chest like a quiet truth. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of something sweet. She turned her head and saw, beyond the palms, trees heavy with fruit, bright yellow and deep red shapes nestled among glossy leaves, food. Her body responded before her mind did. She realized she was hungry. Elara stepped into the shade of the palms and looked up at the sky again. The sun was higher now, warming the top of her head. There was no sense of urgency pressing down on her. No storm clouds gathering. No immediate threat, just space, and time. A strange calm spread through her. She had always rushed. Rushed to wake. Rushed to answer messages. Rushed to meet expectations she barely understood. Even her thoughts had hurried past each other like strangers on a crowded street, but here, there was nothing demanding her attention. The island did not ask her to be anything, it simply existed. Elara knelt and ran her fingers through the sand again, slower this time. She listened to the waves as if they were telling her something ancient and patient. Perhaps this was not something to solve immediately, perhaps this was something to experience. She stood and walked toward the fruit trees. As she stepped off the beach and onto the grassy edge of the island's interior, she felt a subtle shift, like crossing an invisible threshold. The ground was cool under her feet now. Leaves rustled overhead. Sunlight filtered through in golden patterns that danced across her dress. She reached up and touched the trunk of the nearest tree, solid. Real. A deep breath filled her lungs. "I'm here," she whispered. The words felt important. Not "why am I here," not "how do I leave," just, "I'm here," and for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. Somewhere deeper in the island, a bird sang, a clear, melodic note that echoed softly between the trees. Elara smiled without meaning to. Maybe this was the beginning of something, not an ending, not a loss, a beginning, that she did not yet know how long she would stay. Or what the island would ask of her, or what she would discover beneath its canopy of green and sky. But as the tide continued its steady breathing and the wind brushed gently against her skin, Elara felt something inside her loosen, fear, perhaps, or the constant need to understand. The island did not explain itself, it simply welcomed her, and she, standing barefoot beneath the palms, chose, quietly, softly, to stay a little while and listen. The waves answered in their endless rhythm, and the day unfolded like a promise. The fruit was sweeter than anything Elara remembered tasting. She had chosen a round, sun-warmed fruit the color of honey. Its skin gave way easily beneath her fingers, releasing a soft fragrance that reminded her of summer evenings long forgotten. Juice ran down her wrist as she took the first bite, and she laughed, quietly, almost shyly at the sound of her own voice in the open air. The island seemed to approve. A breeze passed gently through the leaves above her, carrying the scent of salt and blossoms. She closed her eyes as she ate, allowing the sweetness to settle not only on her tongue but somewhere deeper, somewhere that had felt empty for a long time. When she finished, she wiped her hands on the grass and looked around more carefully. The island was small, but not tiny. From the beach, she had seen only the outer curve of sand and the fringe of palms. Now, standing at the threshold of its interior, she could see layers, clusters of trees, patches of wildflowers, and a narrow path winding deeper between trunks and ferns, a path, not carved roughly, not trampled in panic, but softly shaped, as if walked often and gently. Elara hesitated only a moment before stepping onto it. The air beneath the trees was cooler. Dappled sunlight moved across her skin like shifting lace. She walked slowly, barefoot on the soft earth. Feeling the textures beneath her feet, fallen leaves, smooth roots, patches of moss. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. not silent, but intentional. She could hear insects humming somewhere unseen, the distant call of birds, and beneath it all, the faint, steady breath of the ocean surrounding everything. The path curved and dipped, leading her toward a clearing she had not seen from the beach. And when she reached it, she stopped. At the center stood a freshwater pool, clear as glass. Perfectly still, a small waterfall trickled from smooth rocks into its surface, creating the gentlest sound, a silver thread of water weaving through the air. Sunlight reflected on the pool, scattering tiny diamonds across the surrounding stones. Elara felt something tighten in her throat. It was beautiful, not grand. Not overwhelming. But quietly perfect. She stepped closer and knelt at the edge. The water was so clear she could see her reflection without distortion. For a moment, she barely recognized herself. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, slightly tangled from sleep and wind. Her eyes looked softer than usual, less guarded. She reached out and touched the surface. Ripples spread outward in delicate rings. She watched her reflection break apart and reform. "Who are you here?" she whispered to the water. The question surprised her. She had always known who she was in the world she left behind. A name. A job. A collection of routines and expectations. A person defined by deadlines and polite smiles and crowded rooms, but here, there were no mirrors except this pool. No one watching. No role to play. She cupped her hands and lifted water to her lips. It was cool and fresh, startlingly pure. It tasted like rain and stone and something ancient. A sense of gratitude bloomed inside her. She stayed there for a long time, simply listening. At some point, she realized her thoughts had slowed. In her old life, her mind had been like a busy intersection, ideas colliding. Worries honking for attention. But here, thoughts moved like clouds, appearing, drifting, dissolving. She leaned back against a sun-warmed rock and allowed herself to close her eyes. The waterfall whispered. Her breathing matched its rhythm. Inhale, exhale. Between each breath, there was a small space, a quiet pause she had never noticed before. A silence between heartbeats, and in that silence, she felt something unexpected, peace, not the kind forced by exhaustion or distraction. Not the fragile calm of temporary escape, a deeper kind, as if the island was not something she had been thrown onto, but something she had been guided toward. When she opened her eyes again, the light had shifted slightly. Afternoon was approaching. Time moved differently here, not faster, not slower, but softer. Without sharp edges, she rose and walked around the pool, exploring its perimeter. On one side, she discovered smooth stones arranged in a half-circle, as if meant for sitting. On another, wild white flowers leaned toward the water. This place had intention, care, but there were still no signs of another person, no tools left behind. No recent fire ash. No footprints in the damp soil, just her, alone, but not lonely. The realization surprised her. She had feared loneliness more than almost anything in her old life. She filled silence with noise. Filled rooms with conversation that meant little. Filled her calendar so that no evening stretched too wide, yet here, in this small clearing with only the sound of falling water and her own breath, she felt full, as if solitude were not emptiness, but space, space to hear herself. A faint rustling sounded behind her. She turned slowly. A small white bird had landed on a nearby branch. It tilted its head, studying her with bright, curious eyes. Its feathers glowed faintly in the filtered sunlight. They regarded each other for a long moment, then, without fear, the bird fluttered down to the edge of the pool. Elara smiled. "I suppose we're both new here," she said softly. The bird dipped its beak into the water, then lifted its head again. The moment felt simple. Ordinary, and yet, it carried a quiet magic. As the afternoon unfolded, Elara explored further, mapping the island gently in her mind. The path from the beach to the pool. The fruit trees near the shelter. A cluster of rocks on the far side where the ocean met darker cliffs. The island was not large, but it was enough space to walk. To think. To breathe. As the sun began its slow descent, she returned to the beach. The sky turned from gold to peach, then into soft rose and lavender. The ocean mirrored the colors like a vast, shifting canvas. She sat near the water and wrapped her arms around her knees. Was she meant to leave? Would someone come? The questions flickered briefly, but they no longer pressed urgently against her mind. Instead, a different thought arose. What if this was not something to escape? What if this was a gift? The sky deepened into indigo. The first stars appeared, brighter than she had ever seen in a city sky. The air cooled gently, brushing against her skin like silk. Elara lay back on the sand and watched the stars multiply. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she did not feel afraid of tomorrow. She felt curious. And beneath the vast, patient sky, with the ocean whispering beside her, she allowed herself to drift into sleep, this time not from exhaustion, but from peace. Elara woke before the sun. For a moment she did not remember where she was. The sky above her was a deep velvet blue, stitched with fading stars. The air was cool against her skin, and the sand beneath her held the memory of yesterday's warmth. Then the ocean breathed, and she remembered. She pushed herself up slowly. A pale silver line stretched along the horizon, announcing the coming dawn. The island felt different at this hour, quieter, suspended between night and morning. Even the waves seemed softer, as if speaking in whispers rather than sentences. Elara stood and brushed the sand from her dress. She felt rested, not the heavy, reluctant rest of city sleep, but something lighter. Her body felt like it belonged to her again. She walked toward the shoreline. The water was darker now, deep indigo turning gradually to blue. The sky shifted in delicate layers, lavender dissolving into peach, peach into gold. Without thinking too much about it, she stepped into the sea. The first touch was cold enough to make her inhale sharply. But the cold was clean, bright. It woke her fully. She walked deeper until the water reached her waist, then her shoulders. That the ocean held her gently. She floated on her back, looking up as the first edge of the sun rose above the horizon. Light spilled across the sky in quiet triumph. The surface of the water shimmered around her like liquid glass. She felt small, but not insignificant, small in the way a note is small inside a symphony, necessary, held, part of something larger. When she returned to shore, droplets clinging to her hair and eyelashes, the island was fully awake. Birds moved between trees. The leaves rustled in a slightly stronger breeze. The scent of warmth began to return to the air. She wrapped her arms around herself and let the wind dry her skin. The wind, she hadn't noticed before how present it was. It carried the ocean's salt, the sweetness of fruit, the coolness of shaded earth. It moved differently depending on where she stood, stronger near the cliffs, softer near the trees. She closed her eyes and listened. The wind had a language, it sighed when it passed through palm fronds. It hummed through narrow spaces between rocks. It whispered against her ears like a secret too soft to fully catch. She began to walk along the edge of the island, following the curve of the beach toward the darker cliffs she had glimpsed the day before. The sand grew coarser under her feet. Small shells dotted the shore, spiraled, ridged, pearly white and pale pink. She crouched to pick one up and held it close. It felt smooth and cool in her palm. She lifted it to her ear without thinking, as she had done as a child. The sound inside was not exactly the ocean, but something like memory. A hollow echo, distant and constant. She smiled. Some habits do not fade. As she approached the cliffs, the character of the island changed. The rocks rose sharply from the water, dark and strong. Waves struck them with gentle persistence, sending up fine sprays that caught the sunlight. Elara climbed carefully, gripping warm stone, finding footholds naturally as if the path had been waiting for her steps. At the top, she found a flat stretch of rock overlooking the vast sea. She stood there, wind tugging at her dress, hair lifting around her face. From this height, the island looked even smaller. A patch of green in endless blue, and yet, she did not feel trapped, she felt centered. In her old life, she had often stood among crowds and felt invisible. As if she were dissolving into the noise of others' expectations. Here, alone on this rock above the ocean, she felt defined, not by others, but by presence. "I'm still me," she whispered to the wind, but it was a quieter version of herself. Not reduced. Refined, the wind answered by brushing warmly across her cheek. She sat at the edge of the cliff and let her legs dangle carefully above the rocks below. The sea stretched endlessly, horizon blurring into sky, for the first time since waking on the beach. A deeper question surfaced. Not sharp, not anxious, but honest. Why me? Why this island? She let the question settle rather than chase it. Perhaps it was not about being chosen, perhaps it was about needing. She had needed silence, she had needed space, she had needed a place where nothing asked her to perform. The realization came gently, like a wave reaching shore. Maybe the island had not taken her from her life. Maybe it had given her back to herself. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. She had been so tired for so long. Tired of striving. Tired of proving. Tired of pretending that constant motion meant growth. Here, growth felt different. It felt like stillness allowing something inside her to unfold naturally. The wind shifted again, softer now. A bird soared past at eye level, gliding effortlessly on invisible currents. Elara watched it until it became a small white shape against the sky. She sat there for a long time. When the sun climbed higher, warming the rocks beneath her, she stood and began to make her way back down. Halfway along the cliff's edge, she noticed something she had not seen before. A narrow opening in the rock face, not large, just wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. She paused. The entrance was shadowed, but not entirely dark. A faint glow seemed to emanate from within, not bright, but inviting. Curiosity stirred in her chest. She approached slowly. Cool air drifted from the opening, carrying a faint scent of minerals and something faintly floral. The wind's voice changed as it slipped into the crack, creating a low, melodic tone. She placed her hand against the stone beside the entrance. It was cool, steady. Her heart beat slightly faster, not from fear, but anticipation. The island, it seemed, was not finished revealing itself. Elara took a breath, and stepped inside. The air inside the cave was cool and gentle, like a hand resting on a warm forehead. Elara paused just beyond the narrow entrance, allowing her eyes to adjust. At first, everything seemed wrapped in soft shadow. Then gradually, shapes began to form, curving walls of stone, smooth and pale, glimmering faintly as if dusted with starlight. The glow she had seen from outside came from deeper within. It was not firelight, it was not sunlight, it was something softer. She stepped carefully forward. The sound of her bare feet against the stone echoed lightly, but the echoes were not harsh. They were rounded, musical, like the cave was repeating her presence in a gentler tone. Drip, somewhere, water fell in slow intervals. The rhythm felt familiar. As she moved deeper, she noticed the walls shimmered faintly in places, embedded with tiny crystals that caught even the smallest hint of light. They did not blaze. They breathed. A subtle luminescence that seemed to pulse with quiet life. The tunnel opened suddenly into a wider chamber. Elara inhaled softly. At the center of the chamber lay a circular pool, much smaller than the freshwater pool outside, but perfectly still. Its surface reflected the faint glow from the crystal-lined walls, creating the illusion of stars beneath the earth. She approached slowly, unlike the pool in the clearing. This one felt different. Not playful. Not open, intimate, private. She knelt at the edge and peered into the water. At first, she saw only her reflection, but as she watched, something shifted. Not in the water, within her, memories rose, not dramatic ones. Not sharp or painful, small ones, sitting alone at her kitchen table late at night, laptop glowing in the dark, smiling politely in conversations where she felt unseen, scrolling endlessly through messages, searching for something she couldn't name. She saw herself walking quickly down crowded streets, headphones in, avoiding eye contact. She saw herself laughing at jokes she didn't find funny. And then, she saw herself younger, barefoot in her grandmother's garden, dirt under her nails, laughing without hesitation. Watching clouds without needing to photograph them. Sitting quietly under a tree, content simply to be. A tremor passed through her chest. The water did not judge, it reflected. Elara reached out and let her fingertips touch the surface. The reflection rippled. The memories softened. In their place came something else, a question, not spoken in words, but felt. What do you want? The question hung in the air like a suspended note. She had spent years answering what was expected of her. What was practical? What was safe? But what did she want? Tears gathered in her eyes again, this time heavier. I want to feel alive, she whispered. Her voice echoed gently around the chamber. I want to wake up and not feel like I'm running late for something I don't even care about. The cave seemed to listen. The crystals along the walls shimmered faintly brighter. I want quiet, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. But not loneliness. I want meaning. The word settled into the water like a stone, meaning. The pool's surface began to glow softly, not blinding, not dramatic. Just warmer. Elara felt something release inside her chest. A tension she hadn't known she was carrying. The island had not brought her here to trap her, it had brought her here to ask her something she had been too busy to hear. She sat beside the pool for a long time. She did not try to force answers. She let the silence hold her. Gradually, her breathing slowed. The cave no longer felt like an enclosed space. It felt like a womb of stillness, a place between who she had been and who she might become. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, not because her questions were solved, but because she had allowed them to exist. As she turned toward the tunnel leading back outside, she noticed something carved faintly into the stone wall near the exit. Not words, a simple symbol, a small circle, within it, a single line curving gently upward. It reminded her of the horizon at sunrise, or a smile. She traced it lightly with her fingers, warm, alive. The island was speaking, but not in instructions, in reflections. Elara stepped back into the sunlight. The brightness startled her at first. The ocean shimmered below the cliffs, radiant and endless. The wind felt warmer now, playful. She descended the rocks slowly, carrying with her a quiet understanding. She had not lost her life, she had paused it, or perhaps, it had paused her. Back on the beach, she walked along the water's edge again. But something inside her had shifted. The sand felt softer. The colors richer. The sky wider. She felt present, truly present, and for the first time, a new thought entered her mind, not anxious, not desperate. When I leave, I will not return the same. The idea did not frighten her, it comforted her, because somewhere between the waves and the cave, between memory and silence, she had begun to remember herself. The sun dipped slowly toward afternoon again, painting everything in warm gold. Elara smiled, not because everything was certain, but because uncertainty no longer felt like danger, it felt like possibility, and the island, patient and luminous, seemed to smile back. The afternoon unfolded slowly, like a page turned without hurry. Elara returned to the grove of fruit trees, her steps unhurried, her breathing steady. The island no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt layered, like a book she had just begun to understand. As she walked, she noticed details she had missed before, tiny blue flowers growing close to the ground, their petals almost translucent in the sunlight. Ants moving with quiet determination along a fallen branch. The way the leaves above did not simply move with the wind, but responded to it, bending without resistance. She stopped beside one of the fruit trees and placed her palm against its trunk. It was warm. Solid, unrushed, the tree did not strain to grow. It did not compete. It simply reached toward the light each day, patiently, invisibly expanding ring by ring. "How long have you been here?" she murmured. The tree did not answer in words, but something about its stillness carried wisdom, patience. Elara had rarely practiced patience with herself. She had demanded quick results, immediate clarity, constant productivity. She had measured her worth by motion, but here, on this island where the sun rose and fell without applause, growth felt slower, truer. She gathered a few fallen fruits from the ground and sat beneath the tree. The shade was cool and dappled. She leaned her back against the trunk and closed her eyes. For a long moment, she did nothing, no planning, no analyzing, just listening. The wind moved through the grove like a soft current. Leaves brushed one another gently, creating a sound like distant rain. Somewhere nearby, the white bird she had seen before fluttered from branch to branch. Her mind tried briefly to reach for structure. What next? How long will you stay? Is someone coming? But the questions felt less urgent now. They drifted away before taking root. Instead, a different awareness surfaced. She noticed her heartbeat, steady, unforced. She noticed the way her shoulders had relaxed since arriving. She noticed that she was not bracing for anything. The realization was subtle but profound. She was not waiting. In her old life, she had always been waiting, for weekends, for vacations, for approval, for the next achievement that might finally quiet the restless voice inside her. Here, there was nothing to wait for, the present moment was not a stepping stone, it was enough. The afternoon light shifted gradually. Shadows grew longer. The heat softened. Elara rose and wandered deeper into the island, beyond the freshwater pool, following a gentle slope upward. The terrain changed slightly, fewer palms, more broad-leaved trees, their trunks curved gracefully as if shaped by years of patient wind. At the top of the rise, she found something she had not expected, a small clearing arranged in quiet symmetry. Low bushes formed a natural border. In the center, a patch of earth had been cleared of grass and stones. Around it, flat rocks were placed in a rough circle. It felt deliberate, prepared. She stepped into the circle slowly. The ground in the center was soft, dark, fertile, a garden, but no plants grew there yet. She stood still, understanding blooming slowly within her. This space was not finished, it was waiting, for her. The thought did not feel dramatic or mystical. It felt simple. She knelt and ran her fingers through the soil. It crumbled easily, rich and ready. The scent of earth rose warm and grounding. Her mind drifted back to her grandmother's garden, how she used to press seeds into the soil with small, careful hands. How she had been taught that growth was quiet. That you could not rush a seed by staring at it, you could only tend, water, wait, trust. Elara looked around the clearing. She could bring seeds from the fruit trees. She could plant something here. Not because she needed to survive, but because tending something might help her understand herself better. A gentle excitement stirred inside her. Not the frantic thrill of accomplishment, but the quiet joy of participation. She left the clearing briefly and gathered a few seeds from the fruits she had eaten earlier. She carried them carefully in the fold of her dress, as if holding something precious. Back in the circle, she knelt again. One by one, she pressed the seeds into the soil. Her movements were slow, intentional. With each seed, she whispered something, not a wish, not a demand, a promise. I will be patient. I will listen. I will grow gently. The words felt almost shy, but true. When she finished, she covered the seeds lightly and sat back on her heels. There was no immediate change, no dramatic transformation, just soil resting quietly under the softening sky. And yet, something inside her had shifted again. She was no longer only receiving what the island offered, she was participating, co-creating. The sun dipped lower, casting warm amber light across the clearing. The rocks around her glowed softly. The wind settled into a gentle hush. Elara lay back in the center of the circle, looking up through the open patch of sky above. Clouds drifted lazily. She imagined roots forming beneath her, invisible but steady. She did not know how long she would remain on the island, but she understood something new. She did not need to rush toward departure. Growth required staying. The first stars began to appear again. Faint in the deepening blue, she rose slowly and made her way back toward the beach, passing the freshwater pool where the waterfall now shimmered silver in twilight. The island hummed softly in the evening air. When she reached the sand, she did not lie down immediately. Instead, she stood at the water's edge and looked out across the horizon. There was no boat, no rescue, no sign of the outside world, and yet, for the first time, she did not feel stranded. She felt planted. The waves rolled forward and retreated, steady, patient. Just like growth. Elara smiled gently into the dusk. Tomorrow, she would water the garden. And she would wait. Morning came wrapped in soft gray light. The sun had not yet risen fully, but the island was already breathing. Elara opened her eyes to the sound of distant waves and something else. a deeper stillness, as if the world were holding its breath before speaking. She sat up slowly. The air felt different today, heavier, not in a threatening way, but in anticipation. The sky was layered with pale clouds, moving slowly across the horizon. The ocean reflected their muted tones, turning silver blue instead of bright turquoise. Elara stood and brushed the sand from her dress. A calm awareness settled over her. Change was coming, not dramatic, not violent. Just change. She walked toward the freshwater pool first, as she had begun to do each morning. The path felt familiar beneath her feet now, her body remembering the slight dip before the clearing, the curve around the leaning tree. At the pool, she knelt and cupped water into her hands. The surface reflected the gray sky like polished stone. "Good morning," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom. The waterfall trickled softly in reply. After drinking, she continued toward the small garden clearing. The soil was still dark and undisturbed, the seeds hidden beneath. She knelt and poured water gently over the earth, watching it absorb without resistance. Nothing had sprouted, but she did not expect it to. Growth, she was beginning to understand, was mostly invisible. As she rose, a stronger gust of wind swept through the clearing. Leaves rustled more urgently. The clouds above shifted faster now, thickening toward the east. A storm. The word arrived calmly in her mind. In her old life, storms had meant inconvenience, cancelled plans, traffic delays, damp clothes and irritation. Here, the idea felt different, necessary. She made her way back toward the beach as the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, not sharp, but low and resonant. The ocean had changed too, the waves were taller now. Their rhythm stronger. Foam curled more insistently at the shore. Elara stood at the water's edge and watched. She did not feel fear, she felt respect. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, pressing her dress against her legs. The palms bent deeply, their leaves thrashing in silver arcs. The sky darkened. The first drop of rain struck her shoulder, cool and deliberate, then another, and another. Within moments, rain fell steadily, washing the sand, flattening small ridges, blurring yesterday's footprints entirely. Elara lifted her face to the sky. The rain soaked her hair, her clothes, her skin. She laughed softly, not in defiance, but in surrender. She did not run for shelter. Instead, she walked slowly into the downpour, letting it cleanse her. Thunder cracked more sharply now, echoing across the island. The ocean roared louder, waves crashing against the distant cliffs with raw power, and still, she felt grounded. Storms were not destruction alone, they were release. The rain grew heavier, drumming against leaves and earth. The freshwater pool would swell. The garden would drink deeply. Elara made her way toward the wooden shelter near the palms when the lightning began to flash closer. Not out of fear, but practicality. The shelter felt like a shared space now, a quiet companion. Inside, she sat cross-legged on the woven mat, watching the curtain of rain blur the world outside. The storm transformed the island, the bright colors muted. The horizon disappeared into mist. The air vibrated with energy. She listened closely. There was no chaos in the storm's rhythm, only intensity. Her mind, once easily overwhelmed by noise and urgency, remained steady. She noticed something profound. The storm outside did not create a storm within her. In her old life, she had absorbed everything around her, others' moods, expectations, frustrations. She had been like open sand, shaped by every passing wave. Now, she felt more like the trees, bending. But rooted, thunder rolled again, then gradually moved farther away, the rain softened from heavy sheets to steady drizzle, the ocean's roar eased, time passed, she did not measure how long. When the rain finally slowed to scattered drops, Elara stepped outside. The island smelled new, fresh, the sand had darkened, smooth and clean. The leaves shimmered with water droplets, each one catching the returning light like tiny lanterns. A faint beam of sunlight pierced the clouds in the distance. She walked toward the garden clearing. The soil was richly saturated now, darker than before. Small rivulets of water had carved delicate lines around the rocks. She knelt and touched the earth, still no visible sprouts, but she smiled. Storms did not produce instant flowers, they prepared the ground. As she stood, something caught her eye. At the edge of the clearing, near one of the stones, a tiny green curve broke through the soil, so small she almost missed it. A single sprout, fragile, determined, her breath caught in her throat. She crouched closer, careful not to disturb it. The storm had not destroyed, it had awakened. A warmth spread through her chest. She understood then, growth required disruption. The life she had lived before had been safe, predictable, contained, but something inside her had needed rain. She rose and looked across the island, now glowing beneath a widening patch of blue sky. The storm clouds drifted away slowly, dissolving at the edges. The ocean returned to its gentler rhythm. Elara felt stronger than she had the day before, not hardened, deepened. The island had shown her that intensity did not mean danger, it meant movement, and she, once afraid of emotional weather, had stood inside it without breaking. As the afternoon light returned in soft gold, she walked back to the beach. The sand was smooth, no trace of yesterday's steps, a quiet beginning. She stood at the shoreline and watched the horizon. Somewhere far beyond it lay her old life, but the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming no longer felt frightening, it felt spacious. Behind her, the tiny sprout continued pushing upward, and within her, something equally small and equally brave did the same. The morning after the storm arrived bright and clear, as if the sky had been washed from the inside. Elara woke with a gentle sense of expectancy humming beneath her ribs. The air felt lighter, almost sparkling. Sunlight poured across the sand in wide golden sheets, and the ocean shimmered with renewed calm. She walked first to the garden. The tiny sprout she had seen the day before stood a little taller now. Still delicate, still thin, but undeniably alive. A second green tip had begun to press through the soil nearby. She knelt and smiled. "You're braver than you look," she whispered. A soft warmth bloomed in her chest. The storm had passed. The island had endured. The garden had responded, and so had she. After watering the seedlings lightly, she wandered back toward the beach. The tide was low, revealing smooth stretches of wet sand that reflected the sky like glass. That was when she saw it, far out on the horizon, a shape, small, dark, moving. She froze, her breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but from recognition. A boat. She narrowed her eyes against the brightness, heart beginning to beat faster. The shape bobbed gently on the water, drawing closer with steady patience. For a moment, her old instincts surged forward, rescue, return, leave. Her body leaned slightly toward the ocean. As if pulled by invisible threads of habit, she imagined stepping into the boat. Imagined the familiar hum of engines, the reappearance of cities, noise, expectations. She imagined explaining where she had been, though she had no words for it. The boat continued its slow approach. Elara did not run toward it. she stood still, the island breeze brushed her shoulders, lifting strands of her hair. Behind her, the trees rustled softly. The garden waited. The freshwater pool shimmered unseen beyond the palms. She placed a hand over her heart. What did she feel? Not panic, not desperation, something steadier. She felt ready, not to escape. To choose. The boat drew closer until she could see a single figure inside, a man standing at the stern, guiding it carefully through the gentle waves. He was not dressed like a rescuer or a sailor in uniform. He wore simple linen clothes, sun-faded and loose. He looked ordinary, peaceful. The boat slowed as it reached shallow water. The man stepped down into the surf, pulling it gently onto the sand. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another. He did not rush forward. He did not call out urgently. He smiled. It was not a wide smile. Not dramatic, just knowing. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice carried easily over the water. Elara felt no alarm at his presence. Only curiosity. "Good morning," she replied. "You've been here a while," he observed, glancing briefly toward the trees and cliffs, as if sensing the changes. "Yes," she said. "I think I needed to be." He nodded, as though that answer was entirely sufficient. Silence stretched between them, not awkward, but open. "Do you want to leave?" he asked gently. The question did not feel like pressure, it felt like a door. Elara turned slightly, looking back at the island, the shelter beneath the palms, the cliff where she had stood against the wind, the cave that had shown her her own reflection. The garden with its fragile, brave sprouts. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were clear. "I don't want to leave who I've become here," she said slowly. "But I don't think I'm meant to stay forever either." The man's expression softened further. "That's how it works," he replied. She tilted her head slightly. "How what works?" "Islands like this," he said, glancing toward the interior. "They don't keep you. They return you." The word settled gently inside her. Return you, not to where you were, but to yourself. She felt it then, fully. The island had not been an escape, it had been a remembering. The man gestured lightly toward the boat. "There's no hurry," he said. "You can decide." Elara walked a few steps toward the water, then paused again. The horizon looked different now, not like a barrier, but like an opening. She realized something important. She was no longer afraid of her old life, because she would not re-enter it the same way. She had planted patience. She had stood in the storm. She had faced her reflection without turning away. The island would not disappear inside her. It would travel with her. She turned back toward the trees one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, not loudly, but with certainty. The wind answered softly through the palms. Then she stepped into the shallow water and approached the boat. The man offered his hand, not to pull her, but to steady her as she stepped inside. The wood felt solid beneath her feet. She sat down quietly. The boat turned gently away from shore. As they drifted outward, Elara watched the island grow smaller. The green softened into a single shape against the endless blue. She did not feel loss. She felt integration. The garden would continue growing. The storm would return someday. The cave would still echo with quiet truths. And somewhere within her, those same spaces now existed. The man guided the boat calmly, saying little. He did not ask questions about where she had come from or where she was going. He did not need to. As the island faded into the horizon, Elara placed her hand over her heart once more. It beat steadily, surely. The ocean stretched wide before them, and for the first time in a very long while, she felt not like someone drifting, but someone navigating. The boat moved without hurry. The water was calm now, stretched wide and luminous beneath the late morning sun. Gentle waves tapped against the wooden hull in a rhythm that felt like breathing. Elara did not look back immediately. She let the island fade at its own pace. The man guiding the boat stood steady, hands relaxed on the worn wood of the tiller. There was something timeless about him, not old, not young. Simply present. For a while, they traveled in silence. Elara watched the horizon ahead. It no longer felt distant or unreachable. It felt like a threshold, one she was crossing not because she was forced to, but because she was ready. The island had been stillness. This was movement, both necessary. She closed her eyes and let the sun warm her face. The scent of salt filled her lungs, but now it carried something else too, anticipation. After some time, she spoke. "Will I remember it clearly?" The man did not look at her immediately. He kept his gaze steady on the water. "Yes," he said. "But not always in images." She considered that. "How, then?" "In choices," he replied. The answer settled deeply. She would remember the island not only as sand and trees and caves, but as patience in the middle of pressure. As stillness before reaction. As roots beneath uncertainty. The boat cut gently through a thin line of mist. For a brief moment, the world around them blurred. Sea and sky dissolved into soft white. Elara felt no fear, she felt transition. When the mist thinned, something appeared ahead, faint at first, the shoreline, not the island's curve, something broader, more distant. Her breath caught slightly. It was familiar. Buildings rose faintly against the sky. Not towering or oppressive, just present. A coastline she recognized from memory, home, but it did not look the same. The edges felt softer somehow. Less sharp. The boat approached steadily. Elara felt her heartbeat quicken, not from anxiety, but from awareness. She was returning. Yet she was not the same woman who had fallen asleep in her apartment. She was quieter, clearer. When the boat reached shallow water near the shore, the man slowed it gently. "You step out alone," he said calmly. She nodded. This part was hers. She stood carefully and stepped into the water. It was cool against her ankles, grounding. She walked toward the sand, each step deliberate. When she reached dry shore, she turned to look back. The man was already guiding the boat away. She opened her mouth to speak, to thank him, perhaps, but something told her it was unnecessary. He raised one hand in quiet acknowledgement. Then the mist rolled gently across the water again. The boat faded. Elara stood alone on the shoreline. The sounds of the world returned gradually, distant voices, the low hum of traffic, the faint call of a gull overhead, but the noise did not overwhelm her. It layered gently over the silence she carried inside. She walked slowly toward the familiar streets. The buildings were as she remembered. The sidewalks, the windows, the patterns of daily life, yet something had shifted, or perhaps, she had. When she reached her apartment building, she paused at the entrance. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass door. She looked the same, but her eyes held something steadier. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and quiet rooms. Nothing dramatic had changed. The lamp still stood beside her bed. Her shoes were still near the door. The kitchen table still held the faint outline of where her laptop had rested. She walked to the window and looked out. The city stretched before her, not as an enemy, not as a trap, as terrain. She understood now, life here would still include storms, deadlines, conversations, disappointments. But she no longer felt at the mercy of them. She carried an island inside her, a garden that required patience. A cave that reflected truth. A shoreline where she could stand and choose. She opened the window slightly, letting in fresh air. The breeze brushed her face gently, and in that quiet moment, she made a simple decision. She would not fill her days with noise to avoid herself. She would not rush growth. She would not measure her worth by constant motion. Instead, she would water what mattered. She would stand steady in storms. She would listen to the language of the wind, even here. As evening approached, she stepped outside again and walked slowly through her neighborhood. The sky above the city glowed faintly with sunset colors, and for a brief, almost imperceptible moment, she could hear waves beneath the hum of traffic, not because they were there, but because she remembered how to listen. She smiled softly. The journey across the water had not ended something, it had begun something quieter, stronger, more deliberate, and as she walked forward into her life, she no longer felt lost between destinations. She felt anchored, even in motion. The first morning back in her apartment felt strangely spacious. Elara woke before her alarm. For a brief second, she expected to hear waves. Instead, there was the distant murmur of early traffic and the soft ticking of the clock on her wall. She lay still, waiting, not for the island to return, but for herself to check in. Her breathing was slow. Her chest felt open. There was no tightness pressing against her ribs. She turned her head toward the window. Pale dawn light filtered between the curtains, softer than she remembered it being. Or perhaps she was seeing it differently now. She sat up and placed her feet on the floor, cool wood beneath her soles. Grounded, before reaching for her phone, before stepping into habit, she closed her eyes. Inhale, exhale, between the breaths, there it was, the space, the same quiet she had felt beside the freshwater pool. The same steady calm she had discovered inside the cave. The island had not stayed behind, it had taken root. She stood and walked to the kitchen. The kettle hissed softly as she heated water for tea. Steam curled upward in delicate spirals, catching the early light. She watched it rise. She did not rush. Outside, the city began to gather speed. Doors closed. Engines started. Footsteps moved with purpose. She felt the familiar current of the world, but she did not step into it blindly. Instead, she carried her tea to the small balcony outside her apartment. It was not a tropical shore. Not white sand or turquoise water, but it was open sky. She sat on the narrow chair and looked out over the rooftops. Clouds drifted lazily above the buildings. A pigeon landed on a nearby railing, tilting its head curiously before fluttering away. Elara smiled faintly. Life here was not separate from the island. It was simply another landscape. After breakfast, she walked to work. The sidewalks were busy. Conversations overlapped. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Before, she would have tightened inside herself, bracing, absorbing, rushing. Now, she softened her gaze. She walked as she had walked along the shoreline, aware of her steps, present in her body, unhurried, even when others hurried past her. At the office, she noticed the fluorescent lights, the hum of computers, the steady tapping of keyboards. Her desk stood where she had left it. She placed her bag down and paused. Instead of immediately opening emails, she sat quietly for 1 minute, just one. Her colleagues moved around her, unaware of the small ritual unfolding within her. She breathed. She remembered the sprout pushing through storm-soaked soil. Growth is invisible before it is visible. Then she opened her computer. The tasks were still there, deadlines still existed, but something had changed in how she met them. She did not try to outrun the day, she moved through it. When a coworker approached her with a rushed question, she listened fully before responding. When an unexpected problem appeared, she did not spiral into silent panic. She asked herself quietly, "Is this a storm I must stand in, or is this a wave I can let pass?" The distinction mattered. By afternoon, she felt something unexpected, energy, not frantic, steady. During her lunch break, instead of scrolling mindlessly through her phone, she walked to a small park nearby. It was modest, a few benches, a handful of trees, but she had rarely noticed it before. She sat beneath one of the trees. The bark was rough beneath her fingers, the leaves above shifted gently in the breeze. Not palm trees, but trees nonetheless. She closed her eyes, and there it was again, the shape of silence. It did not require isolation, it required attention. A subtle realization bloomed inside her: the island had not been a place. It had been a state of being, a remembering of how to inhabit her own life without fleeing from it. That evening, she stopped at a small plant shop on her way home. She wandered slowly between rows of greenery, ferns, succulents, flowering vines. Her fingers brushed the leaves gently. She chose a small plant with tender green shoots, nothing extravagant, nothing dramatic, just alive. Back at her apartment, she placed it near the window where sunlight touched the sill in the morning. She knelt and pressed her fingers lightly into the soil, dark, fertile. She smiled. "Let's grow patiently," she whispered, watering it carefully. She felt the echo of her island garden. That night, as she prepared for sleep, she did not dread the next day. She did not feel trapped by routine. Instead, she felt something quietly unfolding. When she lay down and closed her eyes, she did not immediately drift off. She listened. Beyond the distant city sounds, beyond the ticking clock, she could almost hear waves, not literally, but rhythmically. Her heartbeat matched it, steady, grounded, alive, and in that soft space between wakefulness and dreams, she understood something fully. She had not escaped her life, she had returned to it, with roots, with patience, with the courage to remain present, even when the world moved quickly around her. The seed within her had broken open, not dramatically, but undeniably, and it was growing. Spring arrived quietly, not in a single dramatic morning, but in small, almost invisible shifts. The air softened. Light lingered longer against the windows. The plant on Alara's sill grew 2 new leaves, then 3, she noticed. She had learned to notice. Weeks had passed since her return, yet the island did not feel distant. It felt integrated, woven through her days like a hidden thread. She no longer rushed through mornings, she no longer filled silence out of discomfort. She chose her time more carefully, chose her words more deliberately, chose rest without guilt, and slowly, the world around her responded. One afternoon, as she sat at her desk, she realized something profound. The work she had once endured without thought now felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had. She began speaking up in meetings, not loudly, not aggressively, but honestly. She declined tasks that drained her unnecessarily. She proposed ideas she once would have swallowed, and when doubt whispered, she recognized it, not as truth, but as weather. Weather passes, roots remain. On a Saturday morning, she woke with a familiar stirring in her chest, a pull toward open space. Instead of ignoring it, she followed it. She packed a small bag, water, fruit, a notebook, and took a train out of the city. Not far. Just far enough that the skyline gave way to fields and coastal paths. By afternoon, she stood once again before the sea, not the island's shore, but a real one. The waves rolled in gently, sunlight breaking across their surfaces in shards of silver. She removed her shoes, stepped into the sand. The sensation was immediate, memory meeting present. She walked along the waterline slowly, breathing in the salt air. Seagulls wheeled overhead. The horizon stretched endlessly before her. For a moment, her chest tightened, not with longing, but with gratitude. The island had not been an escape from reality, it had been a teacher. She closed her eyes, and there it was again, the freshwater pool reflecting her truth. The cave of echoes asking what she wanted. The garden pushing fragile green through storm-soaked soil. She understood now. The island had appeared when she was ready to listen, and it had released her when she was ready to live. A small laugh escaped her lips as the tide brushed her toes. "You're still here," she murmured, not to the sea, but to herself. The wind moved gently around her, lifting her hair, cool against her skin. She opened her notebook and sat on a driftwood log. On the first page, she wrote, "That I choose presence, that I choose patience. That I choose growth, even when it is invisible." The words felt steady. Not dramatic promises, but quiet commitments. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft rose and amber, she noticed something unexpected. A small boat far out on the water. It was too distant to see clearly. Just a shape against the horizon. Her heart did not race. She did not wonder if it was coming for her. She simply watched. After a while, the boat turned gently and disappeared into the fading light. She smiled. Some journeys are not meant to be repeated, they are meant to be carried. As twilight deepened, Elara stood and brushed sand from her hands. The first evening star appeared above the darkening sea. She felt no unfinished longing, no unresolved ache, only quiet fullness. She understood, finally, that the island had never been about isolation, it had been about alignment, about remembering that stillness and movement are not opposites, but partners, about realizing that rescue is not always external. Sometimes, it is the simple decision to pause, to listen, to plant something tender inside yourself and trust it to grow. As she walked back toward the train station, the sky behind her faded into deep indigo. The sea continued its endless breathing, and within her, a horizon stretched just as wide. She would still face storms, she would still encounter doubt, but she now carried an internal shoreline, a place she could return to without leaving. That night, as she lay in her bed once more, she opened the window slightly. A soft breeze entered the room. She closed her eyes. The rhythm of the city blended gently with her breath, and somewhere, beneath it all, waves. Not outside, within, Elara smiled in the dark. She was no longer a woman lost on an island. She was a woman who had found her horizon, and wherever she walked next, she would walk with steady roots, open sky above her, and the quiet certainty that she was home, within herself.